Yeah, Wednesday, sorry.
Tuesday, next time we meet, be in tomorrow.
Yeah,
And apparently we're gonna be getting a lot of rain. Oh, how many of you guys drive? Anybody here drive? All right. It's not gonna happen while we're in school, but if it ever freezes, especially the first time it freezes, do not go over that bridge on Parker. That's across that huge cut. That thing is just like an ice sheet.
wait, what bridge?
That, you know that as you're going down Parker Road, you go up Dos Rios or whatever that street's name is, you hit Parker, you take a left, there's that big long bridge.
There's a lake in there?
No, it's just a canyon. It's kind of like a ravine. Have you ever gone that way down Parker?
I don't know street names, to be honest.
Okay, Parker's the big east-west street that's right up there. That has that long bridge that goes over, you know, right. If you're going this way, you're gonna pass the elementary, and then you're gonna get onto that bridge. Because that bridge always freezes over and it's like an ice sheet. Especially if they haven't had time to get the sand trucks out. So, also tell your parents, avoid if you can. Okay, so this is where we got up to last time? No, this is where the computer says we got up to. What did we get up to?
A house divided.
There? Okay, house divided. And let's go back one more thing before we get to that. Basically, let's do a real quick recap of this. We wanted to build a railroad from the East Coast to the West Coast. You know, it'd be a great thing to unite the country again, but like everything, for every one step forward, we're 2 steps back. Is it gonna be in the north or is it gonna be in the south? And both sides wanted to go into their regions to expand their economic and political power as well as economic. Well, the nation really freaks people out when it does the Gadsden Purchase, which is about 29,600 square miles of land we bought from Mexico for like 10 million bucks. So a lot of people thought, oh my gosh, it's gonna be a southern route. That's when Stephen Douglas came in, and he wanted one that went through Chicago, because it already had a north-south artery. And so basically he was able to get it through, but in order to win over southern voters, he said, well now, just like we did with Utah and New Mexico, we're also gonna make Kansas and Nebraska, they're gonna get to decide if they wanna be slave territories or free territories. And that shocked the North. The House united. Okay, like I said, the Kansas-Nebraska Act infuriated the North, that they'd be able to expand slavery. And you get a lot of northern political coalitions that join together to try to defeat it, including the Free Soil Party. And these different groups kind of join together and form what would become known as the Republican Party. Now, once again, I don't want to bring everybody down, but did y'all hear about what happened to me over the weekend? All right, I was going to my origami class, and I borrowed Dwayne Johnson's paper cutting tools, and I misplaced them. So yeah, I lost rocks, paper, scissors. Anyway, see what uh-oh, get through. You're a superstar. Everybody got this? Awesome. Now the North had this whole belief that there was a slave power conspiracy that wanted to expand slavery everywhere in America. And they really didn't have to go too far for proof, because there was a guy by the name of William Walker. He was from the South, and he had led these filibustering expeditions of, getting a lot of adventurers together. At first they tried to take over Baja, Mexico in 1854, which fails. But then the very next year, in 1855, he goes down to Nicaragua with 58 guys, and there's so much turmoil in the country, he's able to take over. He automatically makes Nicaragua a country that would allow slavery. And then he goes to the U.S. and he says, recognize us. And Pierce recognizes Nicaragua. Now, why the heck would the fact that Pierce recognized this slave-owning country, why would that scare Americans? Had America ever had like a revolution happen, and the people took over, and it was pro-slavery, they were an independent country, they asked for recognition, the U.S. did, then the next thing you know, the U.S. annexed that nation? Did that ever happen in America's history? Huh? Texas. Guys, it happened back in 1846, which is like, this is only 9 years after that. So a lot of people in the North were really freaked out. Then, in Washington, D.C., they passed the Austin Manifesto. What's the Austin Manifesto? Well, that's just us telling everybody in the world, hey, by the way, we can take over Cuba if we want to. Now, guys, the only reason in a lot of Northerners' minds that we take over Cuba would be for the cash crops, which would be expansion of slavery. Oh, and by the way, William Walker's government only lasted for about 6 months. I believe, let's see, Vanderbilt, Cornelius Vanderbilt, he sent down an army and he kicked him out of power. Ready for the next slide? So in Bleeding Kansas, now that it's been open to decide if it wants to be slave or free, you have both the North and the South sending armed settlers out to Kansas. Like Eli Thayer was a northern minister who made sure he got supplies for families that were going out to Kansas to vote it free. That included like blankets, flour, and made sure they had a copy of the Thayer's Bible. What was the Thayer's Bible? It was a rifle. Okay? And because Missouri is so close to Kansas, and Missouri was a slave state, it should come as no surprise that not only did Kansas erupt into violence, but 60% of the votes cast in its territorial decision of if we're going to be slave or free were basically illegal. It was by guys that had just slipped over from Missouri, weren't going to stay, and they were going to dip back into their home state after voting in Kansas. Now, when the results come in that Kansas is going to be a slave state, a bunch of anti-slavery people formed the free capital of Kansas, Lawrence. And in response to that, a gang of basically brigands that included Frank and Jesse James go and they burn Lawrence down to the ground. Ready? Well, in response to this, John Brown, this guy, definitely believed that God spoke to him and God wanted him to do something about slavery. he and his sons, he didn't kill anybody, but he basically told his sons to do it. They go out and they shoot 5 pro-slavery men near Potawatomi Creek. And later on, reporters would ask them and say, why did you shoot these guys down in cold blood, you know? Why didn't you challenge them to a duel? To which Brown responded, well, one duels gentlemen, one beats dogs. So fevers are getting pretty high. Y'all ready for the next slide? Meanwhile, this violence isn't limited just to Kansas. I mean, this violence is taking place at our nation's capital. You had Senator Sumner, who was very anti-slavery. He was from Massachusetts. He fought to not only eradicate, but also to try to integrate some of the places in Massachusetts. He was giving a speech before a joint resolution, meaning both the Senate and the House, about how bad slavery was and how slavery needed to be stopped. Meanwhile, Representative Brooks, he was a first-time representative, first time he had been elected from South Carolina, and he had his cane and his knuckles were white because what Sumner was saying angered him so greatly. And in the middle of the speech, Brooks just leaps up. Now this shows him like he's really young. Guys, he was like, I think he was 68 at the time this happened. Anyway, Brooks just goes, smashes him over the head, hits him over the head so hard, he breaks his cane in half. And Sumner, of course, collapses. He starts kicking him while he's down, starts smearing punches in him, and he's pulled off, and everyone's like shocked. You ready? Sir. What's your name, sir? Yeah, you want to take the earbuds out? I know you're watching the World Cup, but you can see what's going on. I'm letting you do it. I don't know who's playing now.
It's Croatia and Japan.
Okay. Ooh. Did Japan beat Germany? Do y'all know? Did Japan beat Germany in the cup? I think they did, which was kind of shocking. Well, what is the result of this violence? Well, guys, basically, what do you think happened? You have the creation of 2 heroes. If you're a northerner, oh my gosh, look at what the South will do. They beat him. He was doing nothing except talking about how slavery was wrong, and he just got up and he started whooping the tar out of them, which of course is totally correct. Meanwhile, if you're in the South, you know, all of a sudden, Brooks, he was fighting for us. He was standing up. We were doing nothing. And they were sitting here and saying all this bad stuff about us. Indeed, the very next day, what did I tell you that Brooks broke when he was beating up Sumner? Yeah, he broke his cane. He goes to his office, opens it up. There's this long box on his desk. He opens up that box and, the card said, from your grateful constituents. He opens up the box and it is a solid gold cane. So things are just falling apart. Ready for the next slide? Well, we have an election, and it's the first time that the Republican Party has been out, and it was defeated, but narrowly. I mean, it almost pulled it out. kind of showing the new party's appeal in the North. Meanwhile, the American Party collapsed over the issue of slavery. Many of its northern members just quit and joined the Republican Party. So on March 4th, 1857, James Buchanan becomes president. He was a 65-year-old man from Pennsylvania. And although the nation needed a strong leader, he was totally unable to provide it. I mean, he wanted national unity, don't get me wrong, but regionalism and slavery began to color every political issue. Ready for the next slide? Well, bringing home slavery to the North. Now, this is where we get the Dred Scott decision. Now, Dred Scott was bought in St. Louis, Missouri, a slave state, in 1830. And his master was in the army. So at that time, he was serving in Missouri. But then, in 1836, he was called to serve in a post up in Michigan, where slavery was illegal. But he kept Dred Scott as a slave. At that fort, Dred Scott got married to another slave. Then, after a year, they were called back to St. Louis. His master dies in like 1844, and basically he sued for his freedom, saying, "Hey, look, I was taken up to Michigan, and you can't have slavery in Michigan. So I shouldn't have been a slave there. So me, my wife, my children, we should all be free." And this is up in the Supreme Court, so it's like 1855 before the time he gets there. And basically the judges talk about it and deliver what a lot of people consider one of the worst rulings in American history. But basically it decreed that Congress could not limit slavery in the territories. His property is property is property is property. Oh, and by the way, the son of the master basically raises the money to buy Dred Scott, his wife and kids, from his mom and give them their freedom. But regardless, this says basically that you can have slavery anywhere in the U.S., which shocks and terrifies a lot of people in the North. Converting more people to the Republican Party than all the abolitionists put together. Ready for the next slide? Well, then in Kansas, you have the Lee-Compton Constitution. That was very pro-slavery. It gets sent to Congress, and Congress doesn't approve it because they decided that non-residents had participated in the ratification vote. So they send it back home, and they rewrite it. They put it up to a vote by the people of Kansas, but by this time, free soilers had made it out to Kansas, so it's not approved at the state level. So tensions are very high. Ready for the next slide? Meanwhile, up in Illinois, basically Abraham Lincoln is going to run for Senate as a Republican, and Douglas, Stephen Douglas, the guy who's the little giant, who helped the Compromise of 1850 get passed, who made Chicago a main railroad hub, he basically is also running. And he was the incumbent. He's the guy who had the position. And most of the debates that they get involved into are about slavery. Lincoln's position was very clear. He believed that slavery was like cancer, and that if it wasn't allowed to expand to the territories, it would die out. So guys, Lincoln was not going to mess with slavery where it was, in the states where it was. He, however, did not want it in any of the territories at all. Now, how would you keeping it just 13 states that had slavery, how would not allowing there to be more states work to limit slavery and to weaken it? Well, guys, we have Congress and Senate, right? And that's where states can exert their power at the federal level. So if you have only 13 slave states and 13 free states, if you don't allow any more slave states, pretty soon you'll have 14, 15, 16, 17. Guys are going to be outnumbered, and they're going to be outvoted by the other states. Meanwhile, Stephen Douglas, he totally goes with the Freeport Doctrine. What's that? That's popular sovereignty. Hey, let the people of the states decide. And that sounds democratic, you know. Everybody got it? Now, radical responses to abolitionism and slavery. The South, they tried to defend slavery's expansion as vital to their economic and political well-being. How are you going to defend slavery? Well, they used religious things like we introduced them to Christianity, we made sure they were saved. Also, they pointed out, hey, in the Bible, slavery's in the Bible, so it's okay. In a weird, wackadoo, kind of convoluted way, they argued that that Southerners actually were freer, the whites were freer and more cultivated, because they knew what it was like to not have rights. You know, kind of like they had slavery in ancient Greece, they had slavery in Rome. And they also pointed out that slave labor was more humane than the wage labor of the North. Remember, they tried not to cram them into housing. They had a varied diet, even though they were the first to suffer if the plantation wasn't doing well. Now, meanwhile, in response to this, John Brown attacks the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia, on October 17th, 1857, where he believes that basically God has told him, hey, you need to go and liberate this arsenal and then pass out all the weapons and the slaves will take them and start this slave. Now guys, this thing was off to, it was kind of crazy from the get-go. They hijacked the train that goes into the arsenal. They force the conductor to take them in there. They get in, they jump out of the train, totally catching some of the guards by surprise. They take over some places, then they're found out, then they kind of get holed up into this one little building called John Brown's Fort. Anyway, but they like let the engineer go. Well, the engineer just turns the train around, goes down about less than a mile to the next train station, uses the telegraph station there to contact Washington, D.C. And the arsenal here is under attack. So Washington, D.C., they send down their best general, Robert E. Lee, to go and put this down. Well, after a few hours of fighting, basically John Brown is killed. And this whole thing is, just blows up in their face. But this scares the willies to a lot of the people in the South of look at what the North is willing to do now. Because Virginia is in the South. And the South, they argue, didn't do anything. And here they are attacking the South. And this is what started, some people in the South started considering seceding from the Union at this point. Now it's into this that you have a Southerner who comes out with a book called The Impending Crisis of the South by Hinton Rowan Helper, who argued that slavery was bad and it was actually hurting the South. He didn't care about what it was doing to the slaves. He believed that it degraded white Southern workers, kept them poor, and enabled slave owners to profit at their expense. But guys who was armed with statistics, he argued that abolishing slavery would improve economic conditions in the South and allow some of the plain folk to share in prosperity. It was totally hated in the South. But in the North, it was very popular, selling more than 500 copies a day. The divided nation. Okay, by 1860, the Democratic Party is split over the issue of slavery in the territories. Now, most of the Northern Democrats, they nominated Douglas for president on a platform of popular sovereignty in the territories. In other words, you let the people of the state decide. Popular sovereignty. And Douglas won the nomination. However, when he wins the nomination, Southern Democrats walk out of the convention and they nominate Vice President John C. Breckinridge on a platform demanding federal protection for slavery in the territories and protection for slavery where it existed. The Constitutional Party, well, they nominate Bell. Why? Because they thought, hey, no one's going to win a majority. It'll go to the House of Representatives, and clearer heads will prevail. Yeah, sure. Make sure you crack the door open. Ready for the next one? Y'all know that elevators terrify me, so I'm taking steps to avoid them. Ready? Meanwhile, the Republicans, they nominate Abraham Lincoln. Now, Lincoln wasn't the guy they wanted. The guy they wanted was William Seward, who was a big-time abolitionist. But William Seward, his campaign manager, and I love this name because it sounds like something out of a Dickens book. His campaign manager was Thurlow Weed. And apparently he played a little too loose with the campaign finances. So they thought that's kind of bad play, we don't want that. They got Lincoln, and basically what did the Republican Party believe in? They were totally opposed to the extension of slavery in the territories. Like we said, if you don't let it grow, it's going to die out. They supported higher tariffs, which the people in the North would have loved. The people in the South and the West would have hated. They were for internal improvements, which most of that road building, canal building, all that's going on in the North and West. Railroad building. So the West probably would have liked this as well as the North. South would have cared less. And they wanted the land in the West to stay very cheap, which the Western farmers would have liked. Why would the Western farmers have liked cheap land? Huh? Yeah, they can buy more, and if you can buy more land, that means you can make more money, grow more crops. Ready for the next slide? Ready? So we have the election of 1860. During the election, the Republicans really emphasized slavery and the corruption of the Democratic Party. Douglas, he runs around trying to unite the Democratic Party, the Southern Democrats and the Northern Democrats, and constitutional unionists. But guys, look, he only winds up getting Missouri and New Jersey. He doesn't even get his home state of Illinois. All right? Most of the South, as you can see right here, they go for Breckinridge. Texas and Kentucky, Virginia, and Tennessee, they all went for Bell. And you start having all these rumors being spread that if the Republicans win, there's going to be all these slave uprisings. And so in the election, basically the Republicans do win because they basically take all of the North as well as Oregon and California. And even though they only win 180, they win 180 electoral votes, even though they only got 40% of the popular vote, they did win a majority of the electoral votes. So Abraham Lincoln is going to be the next president. Now guys, as I told you, the South was not excited about Abraham Lincoln getting elected. You know, you had all those rumors of slave uprisings, he was going to do all this bad stuff. So you started having the first wave of secession, where people wanted to get out of the U.S., which really mushroomed in the Deep South after the Republican victory. Now, a senator from Kentucky by the name of John J. Crittenden tried to introduce several proposals in the Senate in December, saying, hey, look, let's just go back to the Missouri Compromise. Everybody was happy with the Missouri Compromise, forbidding slavery above the line and offering compensation to slave owners who could not retrieve their slaves, which sounded like it made work. But Lincoln was dead set against this because basically it would allow the expansion of slavery into the territories, which he was totally dead set against. So starting with South Carolina, in December of 1860, 5 other states led the way: Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, and Louisiana. And they established the Confederacy. And according to the Confederate Constitution, tariffs were passed, but protective tariffs were made illegal. There was to be no government funding of internal improvements, and it banned slave importation. What? The Confederacy banned slave importation? Why do y'all think that the Confederacy might have banned slave importation? Well, y'all wouldn't know this, but England, kind of the country that sold us a lot of our slaves, they really saw the slave trade as a terrible act and spent a lot of their fortunes from the 1830s up, late 1830s, but especially 1840s, stopping the international slave trade. And so basically the Confederacy, desperate for allies, said, hey, we're not going to allow the importation of slavery, to try to get England to say, okay, we recognize you. And in February, Texas also ceded from the Union. Basically in Texas, Sam Houston had left his Senate seat to come back to run for governor to try to get us to stay in the Union. And basically there was going to be a vote the next day on if Texas was going to join the Confederacy or not. And he got a telegram from Abraham Lincoln, and Abraham Lincoln said, if you keep the Texas in the U.S., I will send you down a division. And do you know what Sam Houston did with that telegraph? He threw it in the fire, because he didn't want to see Texans fighting against fellow Texans. And the next day, when they were doing the roll, as well as the pledges to the Confederate government, because Texas had decided to go with the Confederacy, Sam Houston wasn't in attendance. He was in the basement whittling. So basically he was removed from office, new guy put in his place. He went out to Beaumont and lived in the Steamboat House. No, not Beaumont, Huntsville. And lived in his residence there at Steamboat's house. And I believe he died in 1683. Ready for the next slide? Yeah. Now guys, this thing doesn't seem like it's real at all to a lot of people. And some of the South still are favoring compromise. They tried to have a peace conference in February of 1861, but it totally failed because division in the South prevented union. Jefferson Davis was voted president of the Confederacy, and the Confederates' whole goal was he told the people not to rock the boat. You know, just stay cool, make them attack us, just be chill. Meanwhile, the American president, who's on the way out the door, President Buchanan, he does nothing. Because, you know, what the heck is he supposed to? He doesn't know. America's never gone through something like this before. Meanwhile, Lincoln, who has to get ready to start with a brand new Republican Party, he tries to forge unity in his cabinet, picking men who supported his rivals to build unity. Oh, and just to talk about how weak a president Buchanan was, on January 3rd, 1861, the Star of the West and the Marion, both federal gunboats, were taken over by the Confederacy without a fight. Kind of like guys here in Texas, a big, huge armory of the federal troops was in the Alamo, and the Confederate troops just went out there and said, hey, we're going to take it over. And the Army troops said, okay, let them take it without a fight. It's happened at numerous bases throughout the Confederate States. And this will be our last slide for the day. Make sure you get a Scantron. And we're going to be, when we complete the lecture tomorrow, we're going to be going ahead and going over what you need to do, a little final review. So